help and highlight the games industry here. We have in Canberra more than 100 people in our space. That's across about 30 the games development community. Together, so there's a lot of contract work in Canberra in like defence, medical, construction, education, places like that, and that work can be done by game developers. Those skills are really transferable, but a lot of the time it's hard. People, saw that we were there, saw that we were being able to pass contract work on to people, and we had $500,000 of contract games. There's also a lot of stuff outside of that they can help with as well. Like I said, we're going on to, we've got our Adelaide space now as well. And starting our third one next year. There's a lot of talent here, right here in Canberra though. We've had AAA studios here before, and a lot of that talent has stayed in Canberra, and we've got a lot of great to see these conversations and events like this happening. It's all of you here are helping highlight the game development industry and the sort of thing we need. So thank you for holding the event and coming and talking with us. And these initiatives sound really interesting to us, especially co-working. That's right up our alley, and games. So thank you everyone for coming out and for hosting the event. Thanks.
Thanks, Jared. Work so far, and I'm really looking forward to seeing whatever she can do next. So I do hope you will welcome Penny.
Thank you, Emma. Good evening, everyone. I would also like to acknowledge that we're gathering here tonight on the lands of the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people, and to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I particularly which is why when I was selected as a Senate candidate for the ACT, it was on the top of my list of things that I wanted to do during this campaign. So welcome everybody who's come along tonight, and I really hope that you're as excited about this event as I am. Years ago that I came to Canberra to work for 2K Games. And I was very lucky to have the opportunity to work on the Bioshock series of games and also on XCOM that we helped out with. And I came to Canberra after working in the games industry in Brisbane at Creative Assembly, where I worked on the Total War series of games. And like Irrational Games, here, Creative Assembly was bought out by a large international games publisher, Sega. And this was a fairly common occurrence around Australia during the 2000s, while Australia was seen as a relatively cheap source of outsourcing for the US and for other countries as well. And I'm sure I wouldn't be alone in saying that after we were bought out by Sega, things changed. And I don't believe they were always right. Of course, that all changed when the GFC hit, and our dollar soared in comparison to the US's, and we suddenly became very expensive, and we were no longer cheap labour compared to the US. So when I was working in Brisbane at Creative Assembly, we were alongside Melbourne in terms of having a booming games industry, and back then Melbourne even shared the Game Developers Conference with us, now GCAP. Same thing happened in Melbourne, and 2K Games here in Canberra was actually, I think, the last big AAA style Australian studio to go. And it was very sad, and it was very hard for a lot of us, and the list really just goes on and on. Inside the arc, the game became somewhat of a cult hit, and was awarded an honourable mention in GDC's International Games Festival. Shame has just started considering including video games, which went on to set us up in terms of our foundation for the future projects that we went on to build on. We developed our real-time strategy cross collectible card game in a fantasy cross zombie fund was unspent, and many indie game developers missed out on crucial investments that would have allowed them to take their projects further as well. And really, this is unanimous recommendations, and being unanimous is quite an achievement in the Senate for supporting our Australian industry, one of which was reinstating the activity in our studios and a diversity of stories and of voices that we are conveying through our medium. We'll also extend the producer tax offset and the PDV, that's the post-digital and visual effects offset, to video game developers where they have only been available to film and TV previously. These successful programs are refundable tax offsets that are currently available to producers of Australian feature films and television, but never to game support. We'll also allocate $5 million to assist in the development of creative co-working spaces, such as the Greens also remain committed to telecommunications later. Finally, we reckon is a brilliant local artist who founded Green Music Australia and has been a professional musician since his teenage years, having toured globally designers and programmers. We literally are the unification of creativity and technology, which will underpin many of the industries of the future. I would like now to do what I'm doing if you hadn't realised. About 18 months ago, I accepted a job in the office of Senator Scott Ludlam to advise in the communications line their plans to introduce legislation that would require tech companies to hand over.
And also, like, being a candidate is not an easy thing. Like they've done like you put your face on posters and all this. Has that started yet? All this to look forward to. Like it's kind of a confronting thing to stick yourself out the front of the bow wave and also be repping for this incredibly powerful and wonderful. Actually, maybe this time. So anything that you're able to do to lend a hand. This is Josh up the back, who's studious, and he's probably going to just send your phone number or your email so that we can stay in touch and build the crowd. You're going to ring a bell when I've run out of time? Yeah, I will. Okay, good. Okay. So that's this one, investing in the video game industry and Penny Canvas industry, both the developers who came as both a functional national broadband network, and B, most approximately, I guess, for the industry, we need to restore that fund that we smashed in 2014. It wasn't easy to get them to agree. They did that because, but for me, the cultural impact of the industry is what I find most intriguing, because I honestly believe that it's only just finding its feet in black and white. And people would sit around and watch the test pattern. There would be this thing hanging in the air, exquisite stuff, and it might even help us understand our world a little better, or perhaps a lot better. But the other one that I wanted to touch on is this one. Some kind of silo, or in fact they really don't exist. You know, you like see new Facebook people saying actually privacy is medium. As so much of our financial lives, our social lives, and our followed you into the bathroom and into bed. And into the boardroom. There is no way on earth we would tolerate that. The East Germans, it's happening on an electronic device. It is assumed, and it was in capital letters, and might as well be like, great, data is the new oil at a profit. And that data is our most intimate lives. It's everybody that we communicate with, and it's everywhere that we go. Not just our personal social networks and our proposals for how to do things really differently. Because of course, once these huge data pools exist, they are very readily exploitable by state actors who use it for intelligence agency and to wiretap arguably a friend. Might have thought this through and have legitimate reasons to want to stay in that. That's completely cool, but at least to have thought it through. Today was to be the last day. I'm not going to do a show of hands because it's probably a bit dodgy, but just have a thought. Like the clock is running out on that stuff. That's a really easy win. Just opt out of that shit if you can. But also to win seats. Like numbers really matter. When Adam won the seat in Melbourne for the very first time, the incoming Gillard government needed to negotiate with the Greens on a power sharing agreement, basically, to get Adam's vote of confidence and passing supply in the House of Representatives. That was with one MP in the House of Reps and balance of power in the Senate. And so I hate the idea of politics being a numbers game. I think it should be a contest of ideas. I think it should be much more consensus-based push and pull. But elections and balance of numbers in the Senate is a numbers thing. Getting Penny in the Senate means that's one other useless crossbencher. Sorry, I love it in a really awful way. Like, how much would he hate being knocked off by a Queen? I'm now only 1 degree of separation away from you, and we're going to be very reluctant to let you go. We're definitely going to need your help. And I think also this is probably a really good time to mention this gentleman. Do you want to just stand up? Which is also winnable because Andrew Lee's electorates move north. There's a whole bunch of probably staunch as to what's going on here and how the numbers are lining up. This place is going to have a national focus, a bit unlike what we
So, look, someone much smarter than me once said that hope is like the sun. If you only believe in it when you can see it, you'll never make it through the night. And I know that some of the stuff that Scott was just talking about does sound pretty scary. Take action to protect that. So he mentioned that up the back there that we are a group that is full of leaders. We all have the opportunity to lead in our own local area, with our friends, with our neighbours, with a huge difference in making sure that they know that they can vote for Penny, they can vote for Tim, and that they know what the Greens are going to do. While we're waiting, now would actually be a really good time to go and put your name down on the list. Anyone who hasn't already signed up, we will get you afterwards. In the meantime, I would like to introduce Senator Jordan Steele-John. He is the portfolio holder for digital rights and for youth for the Greens. Senator.
Thank you, Emma. I'd like to start off this evening by acknowledging that we are, of course, meeting on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. Pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty over the land on which we meet was never ceded. Thank you all for digital rights of investing in our frontier creative industries, of the most complex, but also some of the most absolutely candidates for the ACT in the upcoming federal election. Penny Keevers for the Senate and Tim Hollow for the seat of Canberra. You will not find internet should be communication technologies make possible. They represent an incredible opportunity to unpick some of the most entrenched inequality widen. We have seen Australia's place in the world go backwards. Our internet speed now rates up. Can anybody guess? Where our internet speed? How come we used to talk about an innovation nation? I used to wonder what the hell it meant for several reasons, but particularly that. And that has real world implications. You know, you hear conservative play in everyday life, in nearly everything we do. Now, the Greens have always recognised this, and we have been, that's particularly a lens that I've brought to the role. Tonight, I am absolutely thrilled to be able to share with you all our federal policy announcement in relation to the National Broadband Network for the upcoming federal election. And absolutely central, the bedrock of our commitment this time round is very badly. Beyond that commitment, we need to fix this thing. We need to look at it honestly. We need to assess the issues that of the Australian people who own it and who rely on it. That means fibre to the premises. That is what the current government has put on the table. It has and will cost us billions of dollars. But we must stop this absolutely disastrous waste of government as operators in the parliamentary space to realising the full possibilities of the NBN. And that means making sure that it breaks down social barriers. So we will also commit at this election the social services system. The internet should not be, access to it should never be the sole preserve. Sure that it is able to play the role of breaking the tyranny of Australia's geography and bringing people together with the services that it needs. So we will also commit to expanding programs like the Black Spot behind in this transition. And finally, we will ensure that as we build the NBN, as we roll it out, and that is why I'm incredibly proud to announce that we will fully commit to funding a national communication service to facilitate the regulation and creation of accessible technology. An NBN that works for people, not only a society that brings people together, that gives people opportunities. We will do them because they are nothing less than you should be able to expect as a public who have put your faith in government to deliver a massive infrastructure project. We will take no prisoners. We will shy away from no challenge in ensuring that we deliver your time.
Our friendly unemployed South Coast resident. Back to you. And Penny? Yes.
Okay. This is on YouTube where in the game people would say throw a suffragette to an alligator or something like that. Quite hateful stuff. And I wonder how do you deal with that? Is that just a consequence of giving...
The sandbox will reflect what's playing around in the sand. And it's a, you know, we see...
But then again, the game in itself is just a constructed device that people use. So I'm not really sure. But I thought that better minds than mine.
Perhaps the game's developers.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's the game developers' fault. No. I mean, I think that video games are a medium, and they allow people to create whatever kind of content they want when they have those tools available to the end user. And I think you could say have some responsibility in terms of what they're allowing to be put on the platform. And ideally, the developers could have a role in encouraging positive behaviour, but I mean, I think it's really hard to control human behaviour and the way that they display themselves. But also, I think it is true what Jordan said in terms of it's reflecting broader things that are happening in our culture at the moment.
On that, like who gets to decide what we can do and what we can't do online, and keep track of it.
It feels filmed up journalists and murder of political opponents, and it was basically a little fascism trainer, and I think that shit should be kicked off stage. Like, I really do. But others in the room might draw that line in a different spot. And like at the moment, there's this really interesting kind of sleeping giants thing whereby you see offensive stuff come up on Sky News, and they are basically crowdfunding anti-advertiser stuff to get advertisers to pull their support from the platform. But that relies on the outrage being collective and widespread enough to have an impact. So I feel like a question like the one you're raising is, well, shut down. Like, you write an email to Google and they rip it off YouTube. Like, what do people think?
Can I say something on it?
Yes, to your question.
Okay, so it's like, I would call that a sizable minority. That's not like it's not a trivial minority. A bunch of folk didn't put their hands up, but yeah, sure.
I think we've pre-prepared this. We were discussing this in the car on the way over. So like, it's slightly rehearsed. It's just the culture that we have discussing itself, yeah? So what if like the culture that we have is just full of talks, like from being violent? So like, I feel like maybe instead of hitting things as ScoMo would want, hitting it with a big legislative stick, we should maybe like focus on bringing people along with that conversation of like, hey, this is like a beautiful piece of art and I appreciate your skill, but like, can we maybe next time not be toxic shitheads? I don't know, I just putting that out there.
Let's not be toxic.
Yes, at the back there.
Yeah, look, I think your policies are fantastic. You're the only party that makes sense at the moment. Fixing the NBN, dealing obviously with the video game space. The question is basically, what do you need to do to win? And not beyond getting in. Have you analysed the space and what are the actual seats you need to target? And what are the odds? In other words, what's required? What effort is required nationally, not just...
I mean, I think you're talking nationally though, aren't you, in terms of being able
how do you
to
actually enact this
form a
strategy?
minority government or a majority?
That has been politics for the last decade. Every single election cycle, you've gone to the ballot box and said, enough, somebody else. You're not doing it well enough. And so we've seen a systemic, structural decline in support for both of the parties, right? To the point where I think, you know, it's the lowest point ever, and we have a crossbench of 18 or more. Now, what that has effectively done, in my opinion, is to redefine what it means to win an election. You may well form a government in the lower house, it may well be born down there or over there, but it lives or dies in the Senate. It lives or dies in its ability to monopoly that has existed for so long, which brings you know us to the answer that that kind of ability for us to have policy enacted and things like that, comes ever closer each election. But in a broader sense, is about creating a movement of people both in the parliament and outside of it. It can't, we will never succeed in achieving the transformative. Only succeed if we are a true movement both in and outside of the parliament, and that means campaigning, yes, at elections, but also outside of the cycle as well. At the same time as the electorate works together to greater break apart. To answering your question, I mean,
Because it's live, it's a bit hard.
yeah, I mean, Scott, you've had the experience now of being both in and outside this space.
So have you.
Yes. Yeah. Although I haven't gone back out of it yet. Although, so, I mean, do you have a particular take on that?
I don't know whether the question was meant more tactically. So where my head, I mean, I think what you've both said is spot on. Where my head went a little bit is again, and Senate slates right across the country, you end up winning nowhere. It's about focusing, concentrating effort on where we can win, and those are judgment calls. Some of it's research, some of it's gut instinct, a bit of science, a bit of art. And so I wasn't fooling around before when I said this city, this territory is going to be under the spotlight next year, unlike
Absolutely.
it ever has before. Not because we say this at all our public meetings, but you look at the electoral map and some shifts can happen here that will catch the majors by surprise. So how we get our agenda up is stepwise. You go from being out of Parliament to having a single Joe Valentine swing vote in the rare occasions where the two majors disagree. And then a much larger crossbench, and we're the largest piece of that crossbench. Or for example, the power sharing arrangement, which was not a coalition. We had Adam in the House, we had a team of 10 of us in the Senate, and we won basically due to a ton of goodwill that was built by Christine Mill and that team at the time to have a world-leading carbon price initiative, like the largest macroeconomic reform that we had seen probably since the GST was introduced.
Or three.
Well, they have multiple portfolios, and they are kicking goals over there. Or you look at what Shane has managed to knock off in this town. 100% renewable energy city, electrified light rail public transport coming down Northbourne Ave. They will plant the trees again, won't they?
Yeah. More than were taken out.
And thank you. I'm a bit out of these loops. Stepwise, until you end up with a Green Prime Minister. You don't get it done all at the time, but if you've earned that trust and you have a collective effort.
Do we have another question? Yes.
Yeah, so on the subject of digital privacy, I think one of the problems is how invisible it is. Like a lot of people don't really understand what's possible with the data that's collected. I guess the most that you have is seeing as us as individuals, it's like, oh, how do I know where I want that to be? So how can we make it more visible to people?
Over and over again, this really toxic, corrosive creep that is the erosion of our digital rights and privacy, and these huge pieces of stuff either bear down on the Parliament or go through the bloody thing, and you know, at least on the inside, you think it should catch a lot more headlines than it's not completely hidden from us, but actively obscured. And the extent to which that information is then shared with others, and we saw that with the Cambridge Analytica stuff. So yes, there is a challenge, but there is also a profound opportunity, because we have a broader problem in this years. But one of the great ways to reinvigorate that conversation, in my mind, is via the route of digital rights. Because people don't understand, for instance, I've found that there isn't a massive amount of understanding that we don't. For instance, if there was a poll out that Gillian's exact opposite is true in the law. So there isn't a great public understanding of what human rights legislation does and doesn't exist on the books. There is an understanding that we have a problem, I think, with digital privacy as a whole, if not those specific issues, because everybody's of ways that we could be moving to enshrine people's digital rights and make them clear to folks. You know, in the EU particularly. It actually, at the end of the day, though, partly depends on the desire of government at the moment. In fact, the exact opposite is the case. They're very happy to keep that kind of obscure so that they and their security agencies can gather it when they need to or feel like it. So that is a cultural challenge in our parliament as well, I think.
So it's a question of, do I do this thing that might be difficult or difficult to understand versus what's easy and what's enjoyable and, you know, what I do every day. It's kind of, it's hard for people to grasp that and to get involved, I think. But, you know, one thing that has come up recently, which has brought it to light on a very personal level, I think, has been the My Health record. And people have really grabbed onto that, and they understand what the medical data means, and they understand what it means for people who they don't trust and they don't know to be accessing and that to reading that, and what that could mean for them in a way that they don't really get with all of, you know, the Facebook issues or, you know, the communications tapping. It's a lot more real and it's a lot more personal. So I think we latch onto those opportunities and we use them.
Organisation is orchestrating that campaign. That's come out of that general disaffection and fed upness, I think, with the abuse of that kind of stuff. So
people going.
And the other thing that occurred to me, I guess, and I know it's easier to say than to do, but we see it happen every now and again, is like we're dealing with a communications medium, the most powerful communications medium that our species has managed to come up with, and we use the platform to defend itself. There was an example, again, it was very raggedy and it was very bottom up. The government couldn't stick one of these stupid videos on Facebook or talk about any other policy area without 1,000 nerds showing up and bombarding their comments and their feeds and their Twitters and their this and that with stuff about this particular issue. It's like, you want to use the medium, don't abuse it. You know, it's a communications medium, it's also an organised complaint census all the way through. I'm still going to submit it, but you can't have these things that you have no right to have. And so forms of civil disobedience that use the platform to propagate the message can make it hard for them to get other messages out. They need the internet. Every political candidate and party in this country needs that medium to be friendly to them to be able to get the rest of their message out. And we can make it, we can make it very unfriendly.
I think there was another question over here.
Hi.
Yes.
Because they said only 4%, but ours fell down 2 years ago, so I think this My Health record is so, like, fascist that, anyway, my employer is the government, so they could have access to my information, and I just don't agree with it. And I'm one of the 4% who opted out as soon as I heard you had to. Because it was opt-in, now it's opted out, and so only 4%, I heard on the radio this morning, 4% of people have opted out. So that's not very many, that's 90%, 96% who have decided not to do anything or...
That's breathtaking incompetence on behalf of the minister particularly and the government more generally. We've been dealing with an amendment in the Senate today around young people from the ages of 14 to 16. Right, so the legislation as currently drafted would have meant that when you have your record created, that record is then automatically accessible and shared with your parent or guardian. Now that has profound implications for, this was not even on the government's radar. Now, thankfully, we've been able to put up an amendment that would mean that that is reversed, so that you have to actively give. If I look a bit washed out today, that's why. It's called Wednesday. But you're more broadly, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It is scary because it's not on its own. It doesn't occur in isolation. In the year that I've been here, I have seen a trend continue.
The health record system is fundamentally flawed in that it's all in a central repository accessed by thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, and each one of those humans are inherently flawed, and just you have to compromise one human, not even one computer or whatever security settings they claim to have set up. And that's something that's very easy to do. If you have one person in a hospital who has a vendetta, then they can access the whole repository of information.
The head of the agency, the head of the privacy section of the agency, has recently revealed to have resigned and moved on, or fired or pushed because she didn't feel as though her concerns were properly being listened to. There's a venture capitalist group, Tide Group, which have this week met to discuss whether they have any future in.
Thank you. Can someone just give me a quick time check? How are we going for time? Nearly quarter two. So we're running a bit over time already.
With 3 politicians on the panel, I don't know. It's almost like we like to talk, isn't it, really?
So we've just got one last question, and I can see you're very keen to ask it.
I would really like to pursue the first question, but I'll leave that for the moment. My other question is with regard to Sydney, called Smart Cities. It wasn't what I was expecting, and I accidentally ended up in the wrong workshop thinking I was going to learn about how digital technology could help socially disadvantaged. I felt really concerned, and talking to people were saying, I feel very uncomfortable with this, and they said, oh, look, if you're not doing anything wrong, you shouldn't. And
well, then give me your
I'm
internet password.
The government doesn't like me. It concerned me, and I just don't know how much protection we have at the moment, or how much companies are able to just put up their data collection point.
The model, which is that kind of extractive data, is the new oil model that's being rolled out across cities, like at a really granular scale at the moment. They've inverted that and kind of started to apply that principle of data.
Can I see my own data? And their answer is, yeah, no, some of it maybe at some point, go away. And so that ownership of data, as embodied by some of the legislation, in the interesting community conversation for us to have. Because I'm really not sure. There are pros and cons, but it is becoming increasingly impossible to disappear in any way, shape or form. And to take back the agency inherent in that.
The sorts of things that we want to fix. We want to make it consent based. We want to put that back in the hands of the individual. And if you look at this identity matching this biometric into digital information, and the government is really even kind of bragging about how they're going to hook that up with CCTV and be able to just have constant video surveillance of everybody. Heading towards the system that I'm sure you've seen they've got in China.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, are they?
I do not know the answer to that question.
Look, if they were just there to track battle movements at night, that would be okay.
Yeah.
Mental surveillance. Digital rights for
Yeah, I mean, look, I had to chuckle a bit of dark laughter when we were discussing the biometric facial recognition, because what was the name that they gave that?
The capability.
The capability. It's almost like they are going, oh, let's just make 1984 so real. Yeah.
In the meantime, you can lock down your phone's privacy settings so that it's not broadcasting your... Like, we don't have to make it easy for them. Like, raising the cost of surveillance is something that we can do.
Yeah.
Like, just lock down... Like, our phones, if we consent to it, if we let them, are broadcasting all kinds of stuff that an increasing number of devices are picking up. So you can lock that down and at least be leaving less of a trail of breadcrumbs behind us.
Get a VPN.
Get a VPN.
Thank you, everyone, very much. Jordan, is there something you
Well, yes, Emma. There is. Well, no, but quite seriously, folks, everything that we've talked about this evening, everything that Scott has brought to us, everything Penny's spoken on, the stuff about the NBN that I outlined, none of it happens unless we are able to come together, line in the sand, and says, do you know what? You can do big organising while rejecting big money. That is our premise. That is our sentiment as we work to bring these issues to the front. So there is a wonderful, smiley, ginger-haired gentleman at the back there by the name of Josh. Get big money out of our system and create that future for all of us that is possible. So thank you so much for coming along tonight, and please don't leave without talking to Josh.
zombie killing missions, and I'm going to combine that with letterboxing so I can do both things at the same time. If you go and see Josh, he can find you the right